Yesterday, we talked about the recession being canceled. But given the sudden turn in the stock market, the fact that we are at or near record highs across the board, I am curious in the markets like Seattle, the Bay Area, Austin, markets that are very tech heavy, has the housing crash been canceled? We learned from last week from Beth that supply was growing, but demand was kind of lacking. But has something changed with the sudden turn in wealth of tech stocks? Beth, what's going on? What's going on with demand? Is it back?
There. Hello. It's always a highlight of my week to be here. Thank you. So for those who don't know me, I work out of the greater Seattle area. And like you mentioned, tech heavy area, very much influenced by people's stock portfolios and how they feel about those stock portfolios and if they feel secure or insecure. And we did see a big pause when the tariff news hit and portfolios took a major hit. We saw people slamming the brakes and waiting. And even as that started to recover, we were still just feeling that hesitancy out there. But in the last week, I've started to see things start to pick up again. So a couple interesting things happened here in the last week. We saw a huge surge of inventory this last week, more than I've seen in a long time, which there's any number of reasons for that. But basically, it's a later season push in inventory. Everything got pushed later into the season for us. Mm-hmm. And normally I would see as many homes go pending, meaning under contract, as we're coming on every week. But this last week, we had about twice as many new listings. And a lot of them did go under contract, but we have some leftover inventory. However, what I have seen is interesting is that this past few days, I've seen most of that middle inventory that was just kind of sitting there, for us, it's around in my market, sub-market, it's around the 1 million to 1.4 range in there. That had been really languishing. Those are our typical move up buyers, et cetera. And all of the inventory, with a few exceptions, just went under contract in the last 3 days or so. All of a sudden, everyone just got off the fence and got back on, and they're pending. So, and of the 3 listings that we released last week, at least 2 of them are getting multiple offers. So we're working on that. And now we're seeing that back in the mix again. So it's been a roller coaster ride. And that's one of the things I love about real estate is we just have to constantly pivot and be ready to react. And it's important that people, when they're doing their homework or studying their buy box, to make sure you really are plugged in with the boots on the ground, because the news you see out there is old, or it may be, and even just a few weeks ago, it might be old, or it might be for the greater market when you really need to know what's going on in your sub-market. Because for one thing, I've seen different things happening in the city of Seattle than I've seen happen on the east side versus other areas around. So it's really important to make sure you're getting your data, because some people feel like they just, I know what's going on because I read these headlines and somebody said this in the newspaper or whatever, whatever website they're looking on. And it can be very, very different. The boots on the ground, or where you really get to know what's happening from week to week. And it's important you work with an agent that's out there and active too, because then they can be more informed about that. Because if you're operating off old news, you might not formulate, you might be writing offers on the wrong houses or writing them for the wrong price, et cetera. Or it's just, please.
This is predictable. And I think we talked about it last week. It might've been the week before, because I've seen this cycle before, right? So I lived in the Silicon Valley for nearly 50 years, and we've had several tech corrections, where tech stocks are down 20, 30, 40, 50%. And, I remember one time I was consulting. I didn't work for Cisco, but I consulted at Cisco Systems, which is, was the backbone of the internet in the .com era. Mm-hmm. And their stock, basically just did this. But there was a couple of times it had some air pockets. And what happens? Well, these tech workers who, let's be clear, a lot of their income, but most of their wealth is in was at the time called stock options, now called RSUs, restricted stock grants or units. And what happens when, they're shopping for a house. So let's just pretend you're a tech worker and you got $500,000 in Amazon stock, Nvidia stock, whatever it is. And you're looking. and suddenly the stock's not 500,000 anymore, it's 250. What you're going to do in that environment, most people are going to do, is they're going to anchor on the 500. So they're going to stop shopping. They're going to be like, I'll just wait. We'll stay where we are. Because these people live somewhere, right? You don't have that kind of wealth and you're not living somewhere. And they're like, we'll wait for it to go back to 500. But an interesting thing happens when it does get to back to 500. They're actually more motivated because now they know that 500 could disappear in a heartbeat. So what is likely happening in Seattle and much of the country is you had tech workers that were on hold probably for the last 30 or 45 days, maybe 60 days, that are now chomping at the bit because they don't want to see this 500,000 go to 250 again. They're going to take half of it, 250, throw it into real estate and being more diversified. This is consumer behavior 101. I've seen it dozens of times. So it doesn't shock me that demand suddenly came back. The stocks are back to even. It makes perfect sense why they're deploying capital.
Perfect sense. I agree. Great insight. And it's so true. People, the fear of loss is very motivating for people. That's also just psychology 101. And so if they feel like they're, I mean, I'm just projecting, but if somebody feels like their stock portfolio went down and it came back, it's like the fear is that what if it goes down again? Because there's so much uncertainty out there. What can you do to make yourself safe now?
Yeah,
buy a house if that's what's in your plans, or do you make moves to protect what you have is very motivating for people.
No, it happens all the time. The first time it happens to you as somebody who owned a lot of, I worked at tech companies for 25 years. The first time you see your tech job go, your stock get cut in half, you blame the environment, you blame the president, you blame this, whatever. And then if it happens to you again, you got to blame yourself, right? Because you're already over rotated. You work there and most of your wealth is in that company's stock. That's a lot of risk for, one company. So a lot of people, when it comes back, they will instantly look to deploy it to de-risk their life.
Yes, agreed. And then the other thing that people see when you're a buyer out there and you've been looking, waiting, watching, some sellers are doing price drops, and that's still like, hey, it is still true that this market is not booming to the point where you can do wish pricing as a seller. You have to be very strategic. We are seeing some price drops, but some houses had price drops that I think were even more extreme than I would have thought. And they were just sitting out there, which like, interesting. What's
motivated seller,
motivated sellers. And then buyers waiting to see if it's going to keep going down, down, down. And then all of them sell within the space of a few days. Whoa. Then it shifts. And then they start to see, oh my gosh, there's 3 offers on this house. And then the psychology switch flips to where now they're in competition mode. It seems like there's just those 2 modes. It's very much one or the other, and it goes quickly between the 2. And so we were into the buyer market mentality for a while there. And then now I'm seeing it maybe switch a little back over to the sellers where, and it's really case by case. You have to know how to evaluate. There's still, I'm not going to say there aren't opportunities for buyers out there, because there absolutely are, but it's just important to be aware that, in certain circumstances that may not be the case anymore, and you have to watch for that. So
you got to take your shots. When you see an opportunity that makes sense, you got indication that there's a motivated seller with a larger price drop than normal, send an offer in. And I would still send one in below the price because they're clearly motivated. I mean, take your shot.
Yeah, I mean, those ones that went pending that have been on the market for 30, 60 days, which is an eternity in my market, maybe I bet they probably did take something less than this price, or maybe there were some credits in there. I mean, it would make sense. So
I would. I wouldn't. You wouldn't be a good agent if you did.
Yeah, and so when we've had buyers get under contract this week too with great terms too. So I mean, it's possible and it's out there. And I'm really curiously watching what comes on this week and seeing if we have another huge week of push of inventory. I think we'll probably have through the month of May here a lot of inventory coming on. And if it ends up being more than what buyers can absorb, there's going to be some of that overflow. And those ones that go past the review date and a little bit longer, the ones that were positioned where they priced a little higher, maybe based on what prices were in February which it kind of seemed to peak out around then here, that could be the opportunity to come in and it's going to be
it's going to be really interesting to me to watch. Actually, it's not supply for me. It's going to be the demand cycle, because for most of the country, we are clearly in a demand collapse. Where it obviously makes sense to me in some tech heavy areas that people are kind of redeploying equity, stock equity into housing because they don't want to lose it again. It's that fear of losing it twice. Makes perfect sense. But I'm curious about the rest of the country, right? Is what's going on tariffs, on recession calls, on layoffs, on bankruptcies, is that still enough uncertainty and fear that demand stays dormant? Or have we passed peak uncertainty, which I think was 10 days ago, might have been 12 days ago. And while we're still in a very dark place, I'm not trying to act like it's sunny. It's just not as dark. And
It would be
maybe around
interesting to see what people say in the comments, agents, active buyers, chime in on your market. Love to know what's going on there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Folks, let us know in the comments. Have you seen demand change in the last 7 days, right? We got word over the weekend about last week we had UK, then we had China on Saturday or Sunday. Curious, what's going on with demand? But more importantly, Beth, if somebody wanted to buy or sell in King County or even get a top referral anywhere in the country, how do they find you?
Yeah, so a great way to do it is through bethtraversogroup.com. Message me through my website there, or if you Google me, you'll find me out there. And on social media, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, etc. And I'm in school, so people can message me in the school group. And I do love hearing from the one rental at a time community.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth. You're amazing. Have a great week.
Thank you. You too.